All right, we've hit 1 p.m, so we'll get started. Kia ora koutou, ko Sylvie tōku ingoa. It's nice to see you all here today. My name's Sylvie Thrush Marsh. I'm the Chief Evangelist for MyHR. If you haven't come across me before, or if this is your first MyHR webinar, thank you very much for coming along. I'm very, very pleased to be working with a co-host today, which is always a pleasure for me, Josie Askin, who is the Principal of Spring Coaching, and I will introduce Josie in a second and get her to tell us a bit more about what it is we'll be covering off today. So as always, a bit of housekeeping before we kick off. The session is being recorded, so if you have to dash away, or if you need to jump out and take a phone call, or if at the end of the session you'd like to revisit it or share it with someone who you think might find it interesting, you're very welcome to do so, and an email will go out a couple of days after the session with a copy of that recording, so you'll have that available to you. These sessions, as always, really come alive when we have lots of questions and lots of audience participation. So if there's something you think of that you'd like to ask at the start of the session, pop that into the Q&A box. That's totally fine. Alternatively, if you want to wait till the end of the session to ask your question, that's cool as well. What I will do is, just to make sure Josie can get through the majority of her content and have a nice flow, I'll be collating questions, and at the end of the session, I'll ask them all at once. So if you put a question in and we don't speak to it until the Q&A session, that's why I'm just managing the flow of things today. Now, because we do have a recording of this, what that means is if you do ask a question, obviously it will be on the recording. So if you'd like to make your question anonymous, if there's anything a little bit sensitive in there, or if you'd like to ask a question that does have details, I'll do my best to scrub them and make them anonymous. So just a heads up and a reminder that if it's not something you'd be comfortable being on the public record, then maybe ask us later or drop us a message afterwards. So thanks again for coming along. I'd like to at this point welcome Josie to join us. A little bit about Josie and her background. So Josie is the Principal of Spring Coaching, and she's a background in psychology with a BSc in psych. She has over 20 years in performance and planning roles, and that work wasn't really filling her cup. So she decided to set out on her own, to set up her own coaching agency so that she could work with colleagues and with coaches, with clients, and bring meaningful improvement to their lives with the work that she was doing. Interestingly, she also has a background in performance. So she has qualifications in all aspects of performance, which includes nutrition, kind of recovery from stress, mindset, coaching, sleep. So she's very well versed to be talking to us today about productivity and about recovery from all of the things that can prevent us from performing at our best. Josie and mine's paths crossed when one of my marketing colleagues introduced us. We saw that there was an opportunity for us to collaborate on some content, and so Josie very kindly contributed to an article that we wrote around productivity and wellbeing, and off the back of that we agreed that a webinar would be a really wonderful way to bring some of that material to life and to bring some of that material to a wider audience. So thank you for taking time out of your day to join us. So please join me in welcoming Josie. Josie, I'll hand over to you. Thanks for taking us on today.
Yeah, everyone. It's just such an honour to be here. I'm really, really excited to be here today. I'm a massive performance productivity geek. I could talk about it all day, every day. So to be given this opportunity is it just makes me very, very happy. So thank you. Sylvie, would you like me to start sharing now the presentation, or?
Yeah, absolutely. Over to you, Josie. I'll let you share, and then I will get out of the way and let you present. And then at the end of the session, I will pop back up and manage those questions that we have come through.
Excellent. Okay, hopefully you can all see my screens okay. If you can't, please just put a little note in the chat and let Sylvie know so we can make some changes there. So as I said, I am thrilled to be here today, and success for me today would look like at the end of this webinar, you have, one or two things that you can take back to your team that help to improve your team's performance and productivity. A lot of what I'll be sharing with you probably will sound like common sense things. Some of it may sound familiar, and that's awesome. One thing I've found is that there's a big difference between knowing stuff and then actually doing the stuff and putting it into practice. And that's something that I specialize as a coach, is helping to bridge the gap between the knowing and the doing, because so often there's barriers in the way. So most of my clients are really ambitious, driven, really smart, intelligent people. They know exactly what it is that they want to do and how to do it, but actually doing it, that's where the challenge is. So I help them to bridge that gap and break down some barriers. I have crafted this presentation especially for today's audience off the back of that article that Sylvie mentioned. That means that this is the first time I've delivered it to to a group of people. So I have written a few notes because there's so much stuff they want to share with you. They want to make sure they cover it all. So if I do look to the side, I'm just checking out my notes to make sure that I've covered everything. A couple more things I want to mention before I get into it is I would love it if everything I'm about to share with you today was based on my own knowledge, but I actually pull on a lot of resources. I've got a background in science and everything I share is always backed by science. So a couple of the resources that I've used today to form this presentation are a couple of my favourite books. The first is Atomic Habits by James Clear. It's absolutely fantastic. And also this one, Peak Performance, again, a really great book. So if I touch on anything that is of interest to you, definitely check out those books, but you're also welcome to get in contact with me and I'll send you through some links. And finally, I want to make this as practical as I possibly can so you really get the key learnings. So I'd encourage you to have a pen and paper handy because we're going to use that to do a little bit of a social experiment. So let's get going. Yay. Okay, so as Sylvie said, my name is Josie and I'm a coach, facilitator, speaker, and also an athlete. And I've got a really varied career, predominantly in the public sector across government and senior advisory roles. And I have always had this mission to be the best version of myself that I can possibly be. And I've always been really curious around performance, but more importantly, what separates the extraordinary from the ordinary, and also the one-hit wonders from the people that are able to kind of maintain those giddy heights. It's always been the thing that I've been fascinated by. And the really good thing about being a very ambitious, driven person, and I'm assuming based on the fact that you're attending this webinar today, that you're probably one of those people too, because it's close to Christmas and I'm sure you all have very full lives and you've prioritized this time to be here to grow and develop. So that tells me that you're also a really driven and ambitious person. And the positive thing about that is that you tend to do what you set your mind to do. And so my business spring coaching is kind of an example of that. It's something I've always wanted to do and I've gone ahead and I've done it. But the downside of being a really driven and ambitious person, like anything, too much of a good thing can be a bad thing, is that it can lead to burnout. And in my private life, I'm a long distance runner, and it was always my aspiration to be the best runner that I can be. But by doing so, I ended up with something called relative energy deficiency in sports. It's basically an issue with energy availability. And what that led to was me spending several months on crutches. It's a really dark time in my life, not being able to walk, not being able to run. I really felt like I lost my identity. But as I recovered and I kind of observed what was happening in the workplace around me, I noticed that there was parallels between what I went through as an athlete and what I was seeing happening to my colleagues and my managers in the workplace. Really driven, ambitious people pushing themselves to be the best versions of themselves that they can be, but as a consequence, not being able to sustain that, instead burning out. And so I decided to make it my mission to kind of share the lessons that I've learned and to help other people to avoid that. And I love what I do. I love being a coach. I'm a natural cheerleader. I love to support other people to achieve in success. And the other thing I like about being a coach is you may be aware that coaches, we're not there to give advice. We're there to ask questions. And I'm a big believer that the most valuable thing you can do to help somebody is not to give them the answers, but to ask them the right questions. And so I get to ask questions, which kind of suits my curiosity, and I get to help other people. Just finally, I've got to mention there that trail and cafes are my happy places. They are where I feel most relaxed. So in terms of our time together, when I was thinking about all the things I wanted to cover, I noticed it fell into 4 natural themes. And thankfully, those 4 themes kind of matched up with my coaching philosophy. So I had a little yay me woohoo moment. And those 4 things I want to talk to you about is the importance of balance, particularly around oscillating periods of peak performance with rest and recovery. And I'm going to introduce you to the growth equation. The second thing I want to talk to you about is the power of having a routine. So it's the small things that you do each and every day that create your future. And I'm such a big believer in the power of routine and habits that I've created an online course called The Power of Small Steps, which are the 12 scientifically proven things that you can do in your day to help you to achieve success. But also routine is important for productivity and performance because it helps to prime yourself for the activity you're about to do. I'm also going to talk a little bit about purpose and the importance of having a purpose. In terms of the workplace, there are quite a lot of studies that show that if you want to improve the well-being, the engagement of your staff, the best thing you can do is make sure that you have a shared purpose, but then to take it that next step further and show what the individuals are doing, how they contribute to the overall shared purpose. So purpose is key. And then finally, systems. Now, this is going to be a hard thing to say because I am all about goals, but systems are more important than goals. Systems are the things that help you get to that goal, the result that you can then replicate over and over and over again. A goal, once you get there, you're kind of done. And we'll talk about that a bit more because I know that's a big thing to kind of to think about and talk. The first thing I want to do though is share this with you. Multitasking is the answer. Now, time and time again, I hear from really busy people that when they get busy, they multitask. And on the surface, that makes sense because why do one thing when you can do two things, particularly if you're really, really busy? But I'm hoping that we can do a little bit of a social experiment, and Sylvie, I'll get you to participate as well, to just kind of test how true this is. So I'm hoping you have pen and paper ready so you can try this out for yourself. What we're going to do in a moment, when I say go, I'm going to get you to write what I have on the screen there, which is multitasking is a myth. Now I'm going to set a timer and we'll see how long it takes you. So you'll be aware that with any good research study, you always have a control group. So think of this like our control. So I'm just going to set a timer. Get yourself ready, maybe a few warm-up stretches, whatever you need to do to get ready to write. And when you're ready, steady, go, right. Multitasking is a myth. And I'm timing you. Sylvie, let me know when you're done.
I'm finished. I wrote it down.
Oh, well done. Good job. So that took 12 seconds. And that's about average. Most people take, somewhere around that line. So awesome. Well done. We're going to now do our experiment. So think of that as like the control. Now, because we're talking about multitasking, I'm going to introduce a second task for you. In a moment, what you're going to do is you're going to write that same word, the same sentence, sorry, but then you're also going to write the alphabet. But what you're going to do is switch between the two lines. So for example, you'll go M first, then A, U, then B, and continue on until you've written multitasking is a myth and A through to T. So always alternating between the lines. Now you would think, looking at that, it's the same number of letters. So theoretically, if it took us, say, 12 seconds to write multitasking is a myth, it would make sense that it would take about 24 seconds, maybe, I don't know, a couple of extra seconds because you've got to move your pen up and down to write those two lines. So again, I will set a timer and let's see, I'll kind of time us all about, say, maybe 25 seconds because I'm conscious of time and all the things we need to get through. So I'll get my timer out. Cell phones are wonderful. They have so many different things that you can do with them. Okay. Are you ready, Sylvie? Ready, steady, go. So mean putting Sylvie on the spot like this. Coming up to 20 seconds. Ooh. Okay, I'm going to stop there just in the interest of time, but that is 26 seconds. So theoretically, because we've just done the same thing twice, I'm assuming you're all finished, right? How did you get on, Sylvie?
I got up to multitask-y, so multitask with an I on the end, and then I got up to THI in the alphabet. And I don't even think I got the alphabet in the right order, so I need to revisit that, I think.
Okay, excellent. Okay, you've just proven a few things for me. So first of all, I'll say that it takes the average person a good 45 to 50 seconds to do this task. I'm conscious that time is precious, so I kind of stopped the task early. But it's weird that when we're alternating between the two lines, it takes so much longer. That's like 4 times as long. If we were to write multitasking as a myth and then the alphabet, that would take us about 20 seconds. What we've actually been doing is something called switch tasking. So the human brain is not designed to do two cognitive tasks at the same time. And certainly writing a word and doing the alphabet is two cognitive tasks. I've got 99% of us cannot effectively multitask, because there is a very, very small minority of people that can. But given the statistics here, I'm going to assume that most of us cannot effectively multitask. What we're doing is switch tasking, and studies have shown that switch tasking kills productivity by up to 40%. That's massive. And so if you think about the fact that busy people are more likely to do multitasking, it doesn't make sense. So if there's anything you get out of today's session, it's this. If you want to improve your performance and your productivity, single tasking is the answer. So do one thing, finish it, and then do the next thing. Single tasking is the answer. Now, the benefits of single tasking, or conversely, the disadvantages of multitasking, are some of the things that Sylvie was kind enough to share with us. First of all, it takes so much longer when you keep on having to switch tasks. Accuracy drops, so I'm not surprised if people find that they dropped letters out of the alphabet or forgot letters or got confused by what comes next. Accuracy always goes when you're multitasking. I don't know if you're the same as me, but I find that when I'm just focusing on one task at a time, I feel quite calm, I feel quite contented. When I'm trying to do two things at one time, or worse, multiple, it kind of increases my arousal levels. I feel really stressed and anxious and overwhelmed. So single tasking creates a more calm feeling. It also creates something called the flow state, or being in the zone, that you may have heard of. So the flow state, or being in the zone, is when we're 100% focused on the task at hand. And we kind of go into almost this trance-like state. When we're in this state, this is when we're performing our best. But it's also when we feel our best. It's almost like we're meditating. So when you feel your best, you perform your best, but also when you perform your best, you feel your best. A lot of best there, which is great because we want to be our best. And the good thing about all of this is if you're doing things faster, if you're doing things more accurate, so you're doing less rework, if you're feeling calm, if you're in the zone, if you're feeling good, you're going to get more stuff done. You're actually going to achieve more. So again, if there's one thing you get out of today's session, it is that single tasking is the answer. So single tasking is the answer for improved performance and productivity. Now, that's all well and good, but I want to make sure that you're able to sustain high performance. And that kind of brings us into our first topic, which is all about balance, in particular, oscillating between periods of peak performance and rest and recovery. This is a growth equation that I want to share with you. So stress plus rest equals growth, and stress demands rest and rest supports stress. So the more stressed you are, the more rest you need, and the more rested you are, the more stress you can handle. I'm going to share this kind of concept with you in two ways. I'm going to introduce it to you from the sporting world, because this was just key to what led to me being on crutches for so long, but then also share with you how it would play out in the business world. So in the sporting world, there's something called progressive overload, where if you want to get stronger, fitter, faster, or do something, you target the thing that you want to strengthen. So for example, say if you're really interested in having a bulging bicep muscle, you'll target the bicep muscle with doing a bicep curl. But you then want to stress that thing that you want to strengthen. And so you may use a heavy weight to do your bicep curl. So you want to stress it. And by stressing it, you want to get to the right point where you're fatiguing the muscle enough to create little, without going into too much physiology, little micro tears in the muscle. Now, what happens is that during the rest period, the little tears kind of knit together, and they actually knit together stronger than what they were. So the little tears, as they repair, are stronger. So then you repeat, but this time you increase the weight a little bit more. Then you rest and you repeat again. You go through that process over and over and over again. Each time you're able to increase the load or the stress a little bit more. Now, if you don't have that rest, what happens? Well, the muscle ends up breaking, or over time you could end up on crutches. But you know, it's all about getting that balance right. So in the sporting world, rest and recovery is celebrated. In fact, there's a mantra amongst elite athletes of train hard, because yes, you have to do the work, but recover harder, because it's during the recovery that the magic happens. Without the recovery, you will not get stronger, fitter, faster, whatever it is that you're aspiring to do. You will not get that if you do not have the rest and recovery. So that's in the sporting world, and that's called progressive overload. What I wish is that the same principle was applied in the business world, where rest was celebrated as it is for athletes. So in the business world, this is how I would love our days to be. And I appreciate that there's going to be varying degrees of flexibility around how you can plan out your day. But it would look a little bit like a wave, where you'd have these peaks of high performance. Maybe you start off with a gentle exercise in the morning, or you practice gratitude. Then if you're a morning person, you might choose to do your deep focused thinking time, which takes up a lot of energy. Then you come down, you have a little bit of a recovery period. Maybe you make a nice hot coffee or a mochaccino, whatever you like to have, and then you kind of gear yourself up for another big thing that requires, high performance, peak performance. Maybe you're doing a webinar, so you psych yourself up for that, and then you come back down, and you go back up, and you come back down. Now, this is an ideal world, and I guess the challenge for you is how can you adapt this to suit your environment and what you're able to do in your workplace. It will depend on how much autonomy you have around your work schedule, but even a little bit of a tweak can make the world of difference. So that's the ideal, that's what we're looking for. So key points for you to take away is, as much as possible, to be strategic around when you take breaks. Can you cycle the breaks to be after the big things that require more stress or performance from you? But also, can you be strategic around when you take your holidays? So maybe if you know you've got a big project coming up, can you then time a holiday to be after that? I've also got rethink stress. So stress is often seen as the enemy. In fact, there's a billion-dollar industry there helping you to stop stress. But actually, stress can be good for you. And there's a really interesting study done by a social psychologist called Kelly McGoonall, who has found that stress is in the eye of the beholder. You may have heard that the physical response to excitement and anxiety are exactly the same thing. You have the pounding heart, sweaty palms, you just feel ugh. It's exactly the same. The only difference is how your brain translates that feeling in your body, whether or not it perceives it as a threat, so you feel anxious, or something to look forward to, which is excitement. And stress is no different. So if you perceive stress to be a performance enhancer, that is the impact that it will have on you. So you want some stress in your life. The next thing, like I was talking about with the weights, with the bicep curls, is to seek out challenges or tasks that are just manageable. A little bit like Goldilocks and the Three Bears, it's trying to find that sweet spot where you feel outside your comfort zone, so it feels challenging, but not so outside your comfort zone that you feel paralyzed, or that you feel like you can't move forwards, or that you find yourself rocking in a corner somewhere where you're getting completely overwhelmed. But you do need a bit of a challenge there. You do need a little bit of stress in order to grow and develop, because it's outside our comfort zone that we grow and develop the most. My next key point is stress is stress. So our body doesn't differentiate between physical stress, mental stress, emotional stress. In fact, there have been interesting studies that have been done where they've had two groups. There was a control group that was asked to do just a wall sit, and then the experimental group where they were asked to do some really challenging maths equation. Let's say they're doing double division or something, I don't know, Pythagoras theorem or something like that. And then they were asked to do the wall sit. The group that had to do the math problems first performed less than the group that didn't have to do the maths problem. So stress is stress, whether that be physical stress, mental stress, or emotional stress. It's the same with willpower. That's why often for a lot of us, if we've had a very stressful day, we've worked hard, we get home at the end of the evening, our sense of willpower is lower, and we might be more likely to indulge in treats that we might not otherwise. So stress is stress. And then finally, I want to recognise that it is so hard to prioritise rest, particularly in a fast-paced world where being busy is almost like a badge of honour. I've seen people compete about how busy they are. So it takes a lot of courage to prioritise rest, and to also give yourself permission to rest. I know myself, I'm an active relaxer. I find it really hard to rest, even though I know the benefits of it. So it takes a lot of courage to prioritise rest. But rest and recovery is where the magic happens, and that's the thing that helps to achieve sustainable high performance. Without the rest and recovery, you will not be able to sustain high performance. We're not robots. So the next topic I want to go into is around the importance or the power of having routine, but also priming for the activity that you want to do. So Stephen King, an amazing, amazing novelist, and he was well known for being very particular about when, how, and where he wrote. So this is one of his quotes: "Don't wait for the muse. Your time is to make sure the muse knows where you're going to be every day from 9 till noon or 7 till 3. If he knows, I assure you he'll start showing up." So this is particularly important for those of us that may work from home. It's around making sure that you set yourself up to work so you can separate between when you're working and when you're not, when you're having your home life. And so for some of us, we like to bookend our work day and our finishing time with some sort of routine. So let's talk about this in practice. So parents everywhere throughout the country will often do a bedtime call, and this often occurs about 30 minutes before bedtime because they know that it takes a while for a child to get ready for bed, and going through a set routine helps prepare the child to go to sleep easily and hopefully calm down and settle. It's the same for us adults. In fact, the best thing you can do to improve your sleep and your rest and recovery, sleep is like the powerhouse of recovery, is to have a bedtime routine. Because when you do that, you're telling your body it's time now to rest and recover. Similarly, if you ever watch, I don't know if you saw the All Blacks game, but you would have seen the athletes warming up. It's the same with every elite athlete or every musician or performer. They'll go through some sort of ritual or performance before they actually start, so that when they start doing their thing, they are ready to go. They don't need to kind of ease into it. They are there, showing up, ready to go. Another example is Tony Robbins. He does this really weird, wacky, fist-pumping, energetic dance before he goes on stage. If you ever happen to see him backstage, that's what he does. Another example is Jordan Belfort, also known as the Wolf on Wall Street, and he does something really clever. He uses a technique from NLP or neuro-linguistic programming called anchoring. And whenever he goes in, well, whenever he used to go in to do a big deal or negotiate, he would sniff the special, I'm going to say, fragrance, and that would tell him that it was time to bring his game face on. And he would go in there, he would seal the deal, and then he would sniff the thing again just to reinforce that connection between the scent and that sense of power and success. And then finally, I want to share a little anecdote about Karen Walker. So I was lucky enough to recently go to a business symposium, and she was one of the keynote speakers and also part of the panel. And after hearing her talk, I've been girl fanning her since. But when she was on the panel, one of the questions that was asked of all the panelists is, tell me about your average day, what do you do? And the other people on the panelists, who are all very successful in their own right, kind of talk to, whatever happens, happens, kind of go with the flow. Therefore, Karen Walker was very defined and articulate. She had a set routine about what she did, from this time to this time she would do this. And when she did this, she knew that it meant this was going to happen next. And when she did this, it was that. And she was very regimented, knowing that in order to perform your best, you have to kind of set boundaries of what you're doing when. And by doing these routines that she had, it helped her to always be on top of her game for that particular thing that she was focused on doing. So some examples of priming or the importance of routine in practice. Some key points for you is to think about what works best for you. So you may not want to do a fist-pumping high-energy dance before you go into a board meeting. You may not want to sniff a perfume before you do something. It's about finding what works for you, and I'd encourage you to be a little bit of a scientist here. Just test things out and see what makes you feel ready. So for me, although I predominantly work from home, I still like to get dressed up and put on work clothes to start my day. I also have a little activity that I do before I start my work day, which I'll share with you in a moment. And I also do the kind of reverse of that activity to end my work day. That signals to me that it's time to focus, it's time to work, and then at the end of the day, it's time to play. Environment matters as well. And so you remember that Stephen King in his quote talked about, showing up at a particular place. Environment matters. So the environment that you learn something in, if you're able to perform in that same environment, it creates neural pathways and just makes it so much easier. So when I was at university and I was studying, if I could, I would do some of my study in the room that I'd then be doing the exam in. Couldn't always do it, but when I could, I found that it'd make the world of difference, because the same environment that you learn something in, and then you get to perform in the same place. Condition yourself to perform. You may have heard of classical conditioning or Pavlov's dogs. He was able to train dogs to salivate based on a cue, on a bell. And that's what priming or doing a ritual is in essence doing for you. It's helping you prepare yourself for whatever activity, whether it be deep focused thinking at work, or doing a presentation, or getting ready for bed, or whatever it is. It's telling your body it's time to do this particular task. Match activity with energy levels. So this is about as much as possible, and again, noting that we'll all have different flexibilities in our workday, but it's designing the day to suit you. So it is about the ebbs and flows of high performance with rest and recovery. But also, if you know that you're a morning person and you're able to focus better between, say, 9 and 10 or 8:30 or whatever time it is, kind of create a boundary around that time and make that your deep thinking time. If you know that you concentrate better in the evening, make that your high strategic thinking time. If you know that you physically have more energy around lunchtime, maybe do something energetic then. So it's about designing your day to suit your energy flows. And again, we're all different. What works for one person will work differently for another person. And then finally, consistency is king or queen, that the best performers are not consistently great, but they're great at being consistent. So in order for your routine or your habits to work, you need to do them consistently. They can only take a couple of minutes, but that couple of minutes will make the world of difference. And the more you can do it, the easier it will get. So we're going to move on now to our third concept, which is around the idea of purpose. And I wanted to start off by sharing this quote with you. It's very well known. It's practice makes perfect. And it's kind of based on the idea that the more you do something, the better you'll get at it. And I know that Malcolm Gladwell has a theory that 10,000 hours of doing something will make you an expert in doing it. But what's been found is that experience and expertise do not necessarily go hand in hand. Yes, you need to practice. I mean, I've just said consistency is key, but there's something else at play here that creates perfection. And so I like this quote: practice does not make perfect, perfect practice makes perfect. So I've got a few examples to share with you. Hopefully they won't be too doom and gloom for you. The first one is around drivers. You may have heard the statistic that about 90% of drivers think that better than average. And again, statistically, it's just not possible that 90% of drivers are better than average. So if the theory holds true that more experienced drivers would be better, you'd expect that there to be no accidents amongst the most experienced drivers. Unfortunately, statistics don't back this up. Yes, younger drivers are overrepresented in accident data, but so are older, more experienced drivers. And that there could be a number of reasons for that, and we won't delve into it, but it's just more about the idea that experience and expertise don't always go hand in hand. So a couple of studies that can be a little bit scary. One is about psychologists, and they found that there was no connection at all between the level of experience the psychologists had and the success of their clients. Similarly, but potentially even more scary, another study was done with physicians, and they actually found that the more experienced physicians were more likely to misdiagnose or miss something in a scan. And again, there could be many reasons. It could be complacency. But I think there's a few key findings in this next study that I want to share with you about violinists at the Music Academy in Berlin. And a researcher there called Erickson wanted to test this idea around practice makes perfect to find out what was really going on. If it wasn't just about experience, why were some violinists better than others, aside from genetics and DNA? And so he got these violinists to track their practice and in a diary, and then he wanted to review the diaries. And he found that all of the violinists practiced about the same amount of time. It was about 50 hours a week, because these are professional violin players. It's their livelihood, so they're practicing lots. But there was a key difference between the violinists that were at the top of their game, the ones that were like the best, and the other violinists that were great because they're professional violinists, but not the best. and that was the way they practiced. So the very, very best violinists did something quite different. They would kind of pick apart the music, which isn't necessarily the most enjoyable way to do it, but they would pick it apart and just focus on one bar at a time, nail it, and then move to the next. Nail that, and then move to the next. Where for the ones that were still great because they're professional violinists, but not as awesome, they were just going to play the pieces and say willy-nilly. They wouldn't actually focus on one bit at a time. And so the idea being that if you are going to do the work, if you are going to do the practice, make it deliberate. Set a purpose around what it is that you're wanting to do during that time. So key points. The whole idea around experience and expertise, the research doesn't support that 10,000 hour rule. It's very much around quality of the work, not the quantity, just like chocolate, quality, not quantity. And that really supports the 4-day working week that's becoming more and more popular. But it is important that when you sit down to do something, you define a purpose and concrete objectives. So you remember that I said, success for me today in this webinar would look like you each having something that you can do to build on your performance and your productivity, and in turn support your team. So defining a purpose and creating some concrete objectives. To focus and concentrate deeply on the thing that you're doing. So again, it's that single tasking, being in the zone. But also to build it up slowly. Focus and concentration is like any other muscle, any other skill. It takes time to practice. So later on, I'll show a couple of hacks that you can do to help you do this. But just like if you're looking to run a marathon, you wouldn't go out and run a marathon straight away. You might just first of all run around the block, or even just put on your running shoes could be that first step that you take. So build up slowly. It's better to have focused, concentrated, deep time where you actually get stuff done for, say, 5 minutes, than spend 2 hours not achieving anything because you're distracted and switching tasks and don't really know what you're trying to achieve. So focus, concentrate deeply, but build up slowly. So a gift for you, yay. So I wanted to create something that I do in my day-to-day life and share it with you as part of this webinar as a thank you for making the time to be here. So what I like to do at the start of every day is I think about what would make today successful for me. And I pick one thing, the most important thing that will make the day successful for me. And then I think about why is it important? How is it aligned to my values or to my goals? And that becomes my one thing. From there, I pick 2 more things. So this really creates this habit of picking the most essential things. You end up being like a prioritization pro because you're forced to just pick 3 things, but to really think about why it's important to you and set that purpose. So if you'd like a copy of this, it's a free download. The link's just there, and hopefully Sylvie will be so kind to drop it into the chat for us so you can get your copy of it. It's a really handy discipline, and for me, this is the habit that starts my day. And I've done ever since I've done this. At the end of each day, I feel like I've actually achieved something. Wherefore, beforehand, when things were just kind of sporadic and I just do whatever, I could get to the end of the day not really knowing what I had achieved. So systems. So at the start, it was really hard for me to say to forget about goals and to focus on systems because I am all about goal setting and goal achievement. But I wanted to share this. So this is a very well-known quote, but I think it sums up this idea. So give a man a fish and you feed him for a day. Teach him how to fish and you feed him for a lifetime. So the idea behind this quote is that it's far more valuable to teach someone how to do something than to give them something. And so if you think about goals are like giving a fish. And systems are like learning how to fish. So goals are the results you want to achieve, and systems are about the processes that lead to those results. So when you have a system, you can replicate it and get the same outcome. And in practice, I thought probably the most well-known area where this happens is all those quick fixes, the diet pills, where it may work at start, and then as soon as you take that thing away, it stops working because you haven't addressed the underlying cause behind, whether it be overeating or whatever. You need to look at what the root cause is. But also overflowing real or virtual files, inboxes. You may have a goal to have a 0 inbox, and you could clean out your inbox, but if you haven't created a system in order to maintain that, then it's not very helpful. It's just going to take more time because you're going to have to keep setting time aside to clean out your inbox. I used to have to create a lot of reporting. So I was a senior performance and planning advisor and reporter. And back in the day, I used to always have to manually produce these reports. And I always wished that we could systematize and automate the reports. Thankfully, there's now ways of doing that. But back then there wasn't. So, rather than manually produce reports, invest the time to create a system so you can automate the report. Another gem is, of course, fixing the issue in the output rather than the source. So maybe you have some templates at work and you find that there's an error in something and you just fix the thing that you're wanting to hand in with that deadline. But actually it'd been far more valuable to fix the source problem. So then later on in the future, when you use that same template or same system or software, that the bug's not there. It takes more time initially, but the outcome is better. And then very similar to the example with the fish, doing it for the person. So yes, sometimes it feels so much easier just to do something yourself, but ultimately, if you have to keep just doing it yourself, that takes up more of your time. In the long run, it's better to build a system or to train someone else how to do it. And then finally, I've got the advice trap. So as humans, we love to help other people. We love to solve problems. But by always giving advice or giving a solution, we're actually doing the person a disservice. We're not giving them the tools or the systems they need in order to be able to solve that themselves. And so it's far better to help someone by asking the right questions, like a coach does, than to give them the answers. So key points. And I know this first one is hard when you're really, really busy and up against deadlines, but think about long-term gains. It's very similar to the idea of delayed gratification and the famous Stanford marshmallow experiment, but to always think about the long-term gains when you're doing something. And by doing so, it means you're ahead of the ball. You're able to switch into becoming proactive rather than reactive. Build a system for prioritization and time management. And I've got you there. I've got another tool to share with you that you can download. But once you have a system for prioritizing things, then it means that you're able to plan your day and get more things done. The next key point I have is around create boundaries. And this is boundaries around your time and what you say yes to doing. Because when you say yes to doing something, it means you're saying no to doing something else. You only have 24 hours in a day. You can't do everything. And so to always think about what is most important to you? What are your boundaries? How many things that you're willing to do for other people? What are you willing to sacrifice? It's always a trade-off. If you're saying yes to this, what are you saying no to? And finally, automate as much as possible. Use technology. Thankfully, technology is booming, it's growing, it's developing at exponential rates. As much as possible, automate, use technology. I used to have a mouse pad that had this question, am I going to do this again? If yes, build a system. Because yes, it may take you a little bit longer to build that system, but after you've done that task 2 or 3 times, it would have taken you just as long to build a system, and it would have been so much easier and more satisfying. And it's almost like a fix and forget sort of thing. So am I going to do this again? If yes, build a system. So another tool that I use myself and I also share with my clients is this. This is a free day planner for you. And again, it helps you prioritize, but this time like a president. So this day planner utilizes President Eisenhower and Stephen Covey's time management matrix, which plots tasks based on how important and how urgent they are. And often what happens when we're busy is that we spend all of our time dealing to tasks that are urgent and important. And by doing so, we never get around to the tasks that are important to us, but not urgent, until suddenly they become urgent. And then they move into that urgent and important quadrant. And then we feel all stressed out and we're firefighting, we're reacting, and it's a terrible place to be. So this day planner helps you to prioritize your activities based on whether or not they're important and urgent or important and not urgent, and how to prioritize them. Also how to delegate the things that might be urgent, but they're actually not all that important to you. The other thing I like about this day planner, because as I said earlier, when we feel our best, we perform our best. This day planner also has little helpful reminders to remind you to kind of move your body, to sip on water, to have moments of mindfulness as well, and it helps to spark creativity. So again, free gift for you to download. So wrapping up very quickly, a productivity webinar would not be a productivity webinar without some hacks for you. So my number one hack is around chunking. Chunking is, which sounds awful, is where you group like activities together. That could be activities that require the same sort of brain power, like maybe sales calls or applying to emails, but it could also be about location-based. A real life example for you, I was working with an amazing vet who would do house visits, and she would let her clients book into her calendar to make the appointments. She was finding that she was driving all over the region, not necessarily just around a town, but all over the region to get to all of these things. And by doing so, she wasn't able to help as many people because she was spending so much time driving. So instead, what we talked about doing was to actually chunk out days where she would be in this area of town or maybe in this area of town, and only allow people to book that lived in that area of town on those particular days. Now, I know that sounds probably really straightforward when you hear it like that, but for her it was a game changer, and it made sense to her. But knowing something and doing something was a whole different ballgame, because she had a lot of barriers around, could she actually do that? Could she, what if they couldn't make the day, and et cetera, et cetera. She had a whole lot of reasons for why she didn't think it would work. But in actual fact, when she did it, it worked perfectly. And she still had the discretion that if she really wanted to see a client that was at the wrong end of town, she could still choose to do that if she so wished. Another hack is called the Pomodoro technique, which you may have heard of. It was very popular in the best decade in the 80s. And it's the idea of we can't do deep focused thinking all the time. The Pomodoro technique is around doing traditionally 25 minutes of hard work time and then 5-minute break. Come back, 25 minutes hard work, 5 minutes. And there's lots of different apps, websites you can do that you can use to help you keep on board with the Pomodoro technique. So do one thing, then move on to the next. Time management matrix, I've already mentioned, the President Eisenhower, Stephen Covey one. Remove distractions. That's actually probably the number one thing. And that relates to the idea of not doing switch tasking, single tasking only. And finally, the 2-minute rule. The 2-minute rule is around reducing procrastination, because often there are things that we know we could, should, want to do, but they feel like they're going to take too long. The 2-minute rule is about breaking those things down so that they take no more than 2 minutes. So for example, say if you wanted to read the book, Peak Performance, but you just can't get started because you think it's going to take too long to read, you may decide that every single day you'll read just 1 page of Peak Performance, and over time you'll get through the book. 2 minutes is far easier to do than to think about a whole book you have to read that could take hours. So that's a way to beat procrastination. And finally, some tech for you, because again, in a productivity webinar, you have to have some tech. Smartphones, they are awesome. A lot of people don't realize that within their smartphones, they have different features or modes. Often they're called wellbeing or productivity features, but you can set a certain time where you're working. You can also set a certain time for bedtime. Your phone can prepare you to go to bed. So definitely check out the features of your smartphone. Because I have to mention ChatGPT, it definitely does help. For me, I use ChatGPT a lot for brainstorming, but also to sum up key points for me. And I also use it to provide constructive feedback on something that I've written. TextBlaze, that's a Chrome extension. And what I like about TextBlaze is that, say you've got a passage of text that you write regularly, you can set it up as a shortcut so that it instantly writes it for you. And because it's a Chrome extension, it means that it does it on all different applications that you're using Chrome for. Tango is fantastic as well. Tango is really useful for creating handover notes or flow diagrams. Rather than having to create little shapes and move shapes around, you do the task that you're wanting to create the process diagram for, that you're building the system for, because systems are so important, and it actually automatically produces that flow chart for you. Rapid reply, that's awesome too. So if you're a person that you prefer to respond verbally rather than via written word, rapid reply sends voicemail messages over email. Really, really handy if you just don't like typing. Otter is quite a popular one. That records meeting notes, but you can also use it to transcribe. And finally, Vouch. Vouch is a really useful way to collect video testimonials, but you can also use it for interviewing. So the way that it works is you set up some questions that you want asked. It sends an email to the recipient. The recipient clicks on the link and they can record a little video of them answering the questions with little prompts. So again, a really handy technique as well. So we've covered a lot today. So in terms of sustainable peak performance, the 4 concepts to remember: the importance of balance, having a routine, habits, key, having a purpose, being really deliberate and intentional about what you're doing, and finally creating the systems. And finally, single tasking is the answer for improved performance and productivity. It's one key thing. If anything, I want you to take away from today's workshop: single tasking is the answer. And that's me. Feel free to get in touch. I've covered a lot of stuff and lots of research studies I'm happy to share. My details on the screen there.
Josie, I just want to say thank you so much for your kōrero today, for the presentation. It's always a real, it's a really valuable use of our time, I think, to be thinking about productivity, because if you ask anyone off the street, is sleep important? Yes. Is having kind of a routine important? Yes. Is getting the right nutrition important? Yes. But like you say, kind of bridging the gap between the knowing and the doing is so critical. And the Atomic Habits book has come up a little bit in sessions I've been in over the last week, actually, so it's quite a timely resource. And I love, he writes in there, you don't rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. And as someone who has been able to kind of whip magic out of the box at the last minute for a very long part of my academic and working career, thinking about my systems as my baseline rather than my goals as what I'm reaching towards has been a very helpful kind of mindset change for me. So thank you for your time today and for sharing your expertise. We have had some questions come through, so what I will just do is run through them and get you to share your thoughts.
I'll do my best.
Yeah. So first question comes from Fraser. Kia ora, Fraser. Thank you for joining us today. Fraser asks, what are some ways a business can or should systematically implement recovery in a given period for its employees after a busy period, whether that's been busy for the organisation or whether it's just been busy for the individual, but without a drop in operational capacity or the feeling of falling behind?
That's such a great question, and I know it's a real challenge for a lot of business owners. I guess first of all, it is about the mindset. It's whether or not you believe that rest will improve performance and productivity, because if you truly believe that, although I know it's challenging to prioritise rest, I think that's part of the battle, because then that fear of, if I take time off to recover, that then we're going to slip behind, that goes, because you realise that after a period of rest, you actually come back more productive, so you get more stuff done. In terms of how to schedule it into the day, that's a really tricky question, because everyone is unique and likes to rest and recover in different ways. I know of some places that they have like little timers that come on after you've typed so many words and things like that, and it's like a little micro pause that you're forced to do. And yes, they have their place, they definitely help. But also I think it's about creating a culture where it is okay to go out for a lunchtime walk. It is okay if you've had a particularly hard meeting just to pop outside and get some fresh air. It is, yes, there are some things you can do, but it's also a culture thing that really needs to start from the top. It's about the leaders modelling the idea that it is beneficial to take rest, you'll come back stronger.
And I think that piece around figuring out where it fits into the rhythms of your business and your day-to-day is really important, because something that works for a manufacturing environment is not going to work for a professional services environment. They're very different needs. Cool.
That's a great question.
It was a great question. Thank you, Fraser. Kaiser, apologies if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, says the first 2 links on the webinar chat can't be accessed. What I'll do is I'll check in with Josie after the session and just make sure that those links are live. And in the follow-up email that goes around in a couple of days, we'll include the links to the first resource she shared, which is about your day and your mastery, that piece there. And then the second one was around your day planner. So we'll make sure that the links to those resources go out, and if they're not accessible at the moment. So thank you for letting us know. Josie, I've got a question, and look, we've got 6 more minutes, everyone. So if there's anything else that you would like to ask Josie while we have her, this is your chance. Just before we get into any other questions people come through, I wondered what your advice or your broad guidance would be for people who find routine quite difficult. So again, to use myself as an example, I have ADHD, and so routines and kind of doing the same thing regularly is quite challenging for me. I totally see the benefit of a routine. I understand why they're valuable, but what are things that I could do to either help myself stick to routines, or for folk who find the regularity of that difficult? Do you have any advice or guidance that you would share?
Yeah, that again, a really great question. Something I worked through with a client quite recently who also had ADHD, and she loved the idea of a routine, but she found it actually really challenging in practice. And so what we did is we built a keystone habit for her. The idea of a keystone habit is that once you do that one thing, everything else falls into place. And for her, she didn't mind having a keystone habit. It was, she didn't want to have a set day where she would do a particular activity. She wanted to be able to mix it up. And so for her, it was about having a keystone habit at a particular time that she would just plan out the week in advance. And so that was the only routine that she kept, that she would be quite intentional about how she planned her day. So she'd look at her calendar and she'd be like, okay, at this time to this time, I'll do this. At this time to this time, I'll do that. But it would change from week to week, depending on what she had going on. It didn't suit her to always get up at 6 a.m. and go out for a run and because that was boring. She didn't want to do that. But just having that flexibility and knowing that she could plan her day, but it didn't have to be the same every single day, really worked for her.
I love that idea of that flexibility. Thank you. That's a great suggestion. A question here from Louise. What are the top 5 books that you've read, Josie?
Oh, these are such good questions. Okay, so definitely Atomic Habits and Peak Performance. I also love the book Mindset, which is all about the growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. I also like Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway, particularly good for people that often feel like they can't move ahead because of anxiety. And then recently I have been reading the book Less is More, which is the idea of, minimalist, I also love to read good mood objective books, but in terms of coaching life, that'd be my top 5.
In terms of professional recommendations.
Yes. Right. And also The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey, if I can have 6.
I think we'll give you 6. I think Louise will allow it. Thank you, Louise. That was a great question. Well, look, that's all the questions that have come through, so we'll wrap it up and get back into our days. Again, from myself, thank you so much for joining us. I know that I've got at least 2 or 3 things I'm going to be trying differently in my days from Josie's hui today, from Josie's kōrero, so thank you so much. If you have any questions, you're welcome to get in touch with either of us. Josie's details were up on the screen, and again, we'll make sure we send them around in the follow-up email that will have the recording as well. If there's anything that we can do to be helpful around the material, you're very welcome to keep the conversation going and to get in touch. But please join me in thanking Josie for her time today and for sharing her expertise. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, and it's been a joy for me. I love talking about this stuff. So
anytime. We might see if we can do one next year once we're coming off the back of some holidays. What can we do with all our fresh energy now that we've had a few weeks?
Yeah, full batteries.
Perfect. Well, thank you, everyone. We'll see you next time. I will end the recording now, and we'll send it around in a few days.
Happy day.